As you likely know, the Constitution set up a three-branch system of government with checks and balances and separations of powers. The legislature is the branch that is responsible for creating laws, and based on the bicameral system set up under the Great Compromise, there is a House and a Senate. In the House, this is supposed to be the one that's directly related to the people, and the people vote directly on their House of Representatives member, and it's apportioned according to population. As a check on that, the House of Representatives members are elected every 2 years. This was seen as the direct democracy component of the federal government. The Senate was supposed to be a more elite group, and the Senate was made up of people appointed by the state legislatures, and they served for a 6-year term. Sometimes is referred to as the cooling saucer of the American democracy. They're supposed to be a check on what many of the founding fathers referred to as a mobocracy. They fear the direct influence of the people because, in the words of Alexander Hamilton, to paraphrase him, the people are prone to making emotional and uninformed decisions. So this was the reason for the Senate and the House being split up as it was. They also added a president. Now, the president was really interesting because they fought about this quite a bit. There were extremes. Franklin wanted to have almost a council of executives. Alexander Hamilton, on the far other extreme, proposed a monarch during the Constitutional Convention debates. So what they figured out was something in the middle. They would have a single chief executive, which would act as a counterbalance to Congress. He had some powers that the British king didn't even have. He could veto acts of Congress, for example, which the British Parliament had done away with. But the president would be elected to a 4-year term. He would be elected by a group of people known as the electors in what's called the Electoral College. This, again, was a way to take some of the mob will away from the people. If the people couldn't directly elect it, then, and the electors were sort of this elite aristocratic group, then they might make a better decision. Each state would have the number of electors equal to the number of representatives in Congress. So your House of Representatives members plus the state senators. When they were looking at the executive, the president, they were actually looking at Washington. There is a theory that one of the reasons the president got as much power as he did was that Washington was unable to have children, therefore he couldn't create a hereditary rule, which is kind of an interesting concept. But they gave a lot of powers to the president. Among the powers were that the president could override an act of Congress through a veto. He was the nation's chief diplomat, became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and was made the person that was responsible for executing the laws of Congress. He was limited. The president couldn't declare war, couldn't declare peace. Those were reserved for Congress. The president could also be removed from office through impeachment, something that the king couldn't have done to him. The impeachment charges are treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. But it took a 2/3 vote in the Senate to do so. There have been 2 impeachment trials in our history: Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton. Many people think that Richard Nixon was impeached. He was not. He resigned before he could. The third branch was the judicial branch. This branch was largely uncontroversial. It set up a high court led by a chief justice that would interpret the laws of the Constitution to make sure that all citizens were receiving equal justice under the law.